Hey, good morning, Central. Happy to spend this morning with you. Thanks for joining us as we open up the Word of God and start out our day talking about what it means to be a Christian, what it means to be devoted to Him. I'll give everyone just a second to say hi to each other in the chat. Happy Monday to you. Well, hey, growing up, my mom would always frustrate me doing this. She'd buy a new book, she'd read the last chapter of the book, and then she would go back and start from the beginning and read through the whole book. And or she would start going halfway through it, things would get really scary, and then she would end, she'd go to the last chapter and read what happens, find out who lives, who dies, and then go back to the beginning of the book. And as a kid, this didn't make any sense to me. I mean, you're supposed to read the book from the beginning to the end. And, as an adult now, though, I kind of understand it. As you're reading through things, you're reading through a tough story where things are a little bit uncertain or someone's facing a difficult choice. It really matters how the story ends. And if you know the ending, what happens in the middle, it's important, but you already know how it ends, so it's not so scary anymore. She would even do this in movies, and she still does this on those rare times when we're in person watching a movie together. She'll start out the movie and we'll find out who the main characters are. There'll be some sense of a plot, and then almost inevitably the first question she'll ask me is, does that person live? Does that person die? What happens in this story? And if you would watch the movie, you would find out. But of course, what she's trying to do is to become less worried or scared during the scary moments of the story. And as a kid, I didn't understand that, but now as an adult, I can relate to that a little more. When things are a little bit scarier, I like to know how they end. What I want to do today is suggest to you that in the midst of a time that's increasingly, for us at least, terrible, that's increasingly uncertain, that's increasingly difficult, that we have the end of the book. We know how the story ends. And we know, no matter what happens, that this chapter comes to play. I'm speaking, of course, of the end of the book of Revelation and the restoration of all things, when Christ is on the throne and he is restoring things to the way that they were. So I want to read for you part of the book of Revelation. This is the end of Revelation, the very last chapter of our Bibles, Revelation chapter 22. And I just want to read the last 5 verses of this chapter. So Revelation 22, verse 1. Then he showed me a river of the water of life, clear as crystal, coming from the throne of God and of the Lamb in the middle of its street. On either side of the river was the tree of life, bearing 12 kinds of fruit, yielding its fruit every month, and the leaves of the trees were for the healing of the nations. There will no longer be any curse. And the throne of God and the Lamb will be in it, and his bondservants will serve him. They will see his face, and his name will be on their foreheads. And there will no longer be any night, and they will not have a need of the light of the lamp or the light of a sun, because the Lord their God will illumine them, and they will reign forever and ever. We're not at that point yet in the story. Even as our cases rise in our nation, even here in Marshville, our Walmart ran out of toilet paper again, and people are starting to get worried about things getting even worse. And it might happen. Things that are unpleasant seem to happen frequently. And if history tells us anything, this won't be the last travesty that this world faces. There's going to be even more and even more harmful and painful ones in the future. But remember this last chapter. Remember how this story ends. See, no matter what happens previously in this book, the fall of man, the rebellion of people, the death of Christ, all of that is done to reach this end, this same story. When my mom would read the last chapter, and then she would go back and read the chapters in between and the middle chapters, things would happen that were in the middle chapters that would seem unfair, seem unpleasant, seem dark and harmful to the main characters of the story. But in reality, it was insignificant in comparison to what was to come. See, it didn't matter what happened in the middle if you already know how the story ends. And so my little encouragement for us today, if I have anything to share with the church, if I have anything to share, quite honestly, with myself, as I'm going through, trying to work through what this means for the church, what this means for our country, what this means for all sorts of things. I don't know what happens in the middle of the story. And it's really hard because the life between the first tree of life and the second tree of life is difficult. But I know that at the end, when everything is said and done, this is how the story ends. And because of that, all the stuff that happens in the middle, all of the stuff that happens that's difficult to grasp and difficult for us in varieties of ways, even though they're not pleasant, they're just not worth comparing to how the story ends. Because nothing that happens in the middle can change the fact that one day Christ will restore things, and there will be a new heaven and a new earth. The old order of things will be done away with, and we will reign with Christ forever and ever. No matter what happens to me today, tomorrow, whatever happens to you today or tomorrow, that reality will not change. The end of the story has already been written, and we now are just living in the middle chapters. I'm sorry to pick on my mom for us, but hopefully you can understand that plays a big part of what we're talking about today. Church, I thank you for being a part of us this morning and for tuning in. I pray that your life and your family would be blessed today, and that as we are living in these middle chapters, that you would be faithful so that this can be the end that you participate in. May the Lord protect you and have a blessed day.